was at 58 years old, I decided that I wanted to be a podcaster. And I'm a digital immigrant. So it was a really deep dive. I drank from the fire hose, but I learned that podcasting is DIY. And I don't necessarily mean do it yourself. For me, that acronym's out to Dan Invested Years. It was a lot of knowledge to gain, but it's doable. It can be done. And I'm here today to share that knowledge, get you moving in the right direction, help you avoid the mistakes and the pitfalls, and to give you all the little tips and tricks that I've gained over the past 3 years. Podcasting is a mystery to many, and it's a insurmountable technical endeavor. It's a scary leap into an unknown space, but I have 2 words for that type of thinking, and they are podcast, schmodcast. It is really doable. If I can do it, anyone can do it. First thing I want to do is help you decide what your topic of your podcast might be, or if you already have it, help you hone that idea a little bit. So I use this Venn diagram. I was a teacher many moons ago, and I loved Venn diagrams. I taught history. But this exercise will help you get at that topic. And it will tell you, I'm also going to tell you a little bit about me and my own personal podcast. But if you look on the left-hand side, the knowledge side, this is what you know, this is what you were trained in, this is what you were educated in, this is what you do for work, perhaps what you do on a daily basis. It's what you have a black belt in. It's what you know cold. You know this stuff cold. On the right-hand side is what you are passionate about. Why do you get up in the morning? What inspires you? What motivates you? What do you think has value in the world? And how do you think you could bring that value out to other people? So, and then where those 2 things overlap is sometimes a good place to find your topic. So for me, I studied history. I taught history. I like history and culture and social structures. I like change. I like to see how things change over the years. As I said before, I taught history for a little while. I taught 8th grade history for a few years. And I still read my history books. I like history. And nerd alert, I have a metal detector, and I like going on old farms or old structures from the 1700s, 1800s. And I use my metal detector and I find things in the ground, relics, stuff that's not worth anything. But I look at that thing and I hold it in my hand, and somebody had that in their hand 200 years ago, 300 years ago. And I love that. I just love the fact that somebody lost that and I found it. And so I do a little bit of research on it, and then I try to tell a little story, a little narrative about what I found, who owned it, what it meant to them back then, and maybe what it can tell us about life today. So my topic is story. I tell stories of what it was like living in the past and relating them to the present. And my podcast is called Life Underground. So this is just something that will help you, perhaps hone your own idea. Let me tell you about this podcast. Is a passion project. It doesn't get a tremendous amount of downloads. I think I'm closing in on 3,000 downloads after like 2.5 years. So it's not monetized. I don't have sponsors. It's a friends and family following. I do this purely for the love of it, and I love doing this. I love podcasting. So why would you podcast? The question I ask everybody is, why do you want to do a podcast? Maybe it's for the same reason that I'm doing it. Maybe it's for a different reason. But I want to kind of give you an understanding of the high end of podcasting and what I do, which I consider the low end of podcasting. This is the Joe Rogan podcast. He is the #1 podcaster in the world. He ranks top of the charts all the time. He stays #1 in Apple consistently. Sometimes he gets bumped out here and there. But he gets 190 million downloads in 1 month. And he does about $30,000 per episode in sponsor ad deals. He was just paid $100 million from Spotify just to be on their platform alone. He's not going to be on Apple anymore or Stitcher or TuneIn or Google. He's only going to be on Spotify because they gave him $100 million. He started as an independent content creator, just like me. He had no overhead. He had no big publishing facility, no program manager, no middlemen. He recorded his episodes from his home using modest, relatively inexpensive equipment, and he promoted himself on social media. He is what everyone thinks of when you think of podcasters as indie free thinkers who made a lot of money. And this is also a fantasy that a lot of people have when they start a podcast. And I'm here to sober you up. It's not reality for the vast majority of us. It's not going to happen. Still, the podcast space is exploding. In May, there were 96,000 new podcasts approved in Apple. There are currently over 1 million podcasts total, and that's podcast shows, not episodes, podcast shows. That number keeps expanding month after month. Many of these podcasts are being built for a different reason than the Joe Rogan dream. Podcasting is becoming a great networking tool. The benefits of having a podcast and creating an engaged, grateful network of industry professionals or others, leading to strategic partnerships, new clients, new connections. When you have guests on your podcast, you create value for them by amplifying their mission and their message on your platform. Everyone you ask to be on your show will say yes, I guarantee it, because it's cool, it's the new medium, it's exciting, everybody's into it right now and they want to understand what it's about. It opens doors, it gets you into intimate conversations with other people, it solidifies close relationships. And through social media campaigns and opt-in email lists, you drive eyes back to your branded website, you give listeners ways to subscribe off your website in the major podcast directories. You give your guest the same ability to put the episode on their branded website as well. They blast on social media. It's a win-win. You become a connector, an influencer, and an industry expert. It's an instant credibility boost. So no PowerPoint presentation is worth anything without a couple of graphs. So I'm going to throw a couple of graphs at you real quick. But this data is from Edison Research and Triton's Infinite Dial report for 2020. This is the most comprehensive survey for data on digital media consumption in North America. It shows that since podcasts first started in 2006, some 70% are now familiar with the term podcasting. There's a gap for sure for people who understand what it is and those who consume them, but the space is exploding. And the promotion of podcasting is now taking on more traditional forms of marketing. We're now hearing about them on major television, network ads, on the radio and print. They have really hit the mainstream. This slide is compelling because it shows that people who have ever listened to a podcast has gone from 11% to 55%, and it climbs steadily year after year. That's an estimated 155 million people that have listened to a podcast in the last year. And radio has a serious hardware problem. I'm sorry, we're not at radio yet. This is monthly podcast listening, and monthly podcast consumers grew by 16% year over year, cresting 100 million for the first time. Here's my radio slide. Radio has a hardware problem. Over the past 12 years, the number of people who did not own a single AM/FM radio went from 4% in 2008 to 32% in 2020. The first automobiles are now being manufactured that do not have AM/FM radios in them. They're coming off the line that way. Instead, the dashboard's shaking hands with your iOS or Android device. It's talking to your phone. Here's the devices that people are using to listen to podcasts. You can do it on your desktop. You can do it on your laptop. You can do it on a tablet, but most frequently it's on a phone. And as we just mentioned, in the car. Also, people are picking up podcasts off the smart speakers, off Alexa, off Apple Watches. All the intelligent assistants are now pulling in that kind of content. I get a great story. One day, my wife and my son and I were in the kitchen, and we were listening to View from the Penalty Box. And my son is a hockey player. So we're listening to a podcast called View from the Penalty Box. And we're in the kitchen, and we called it up on Alexa. And we gathered around the smart speaker to listen to something as a family. Think about that. Like, we did something that my son I never did, and my son never even heard about, and that was gathering around the radio. People did that year in the 20s and the 30s. They gathered around the radio. So it's a really interesting time because with, you know, the way we're consuming digital media, it's coming back around. I think these smart speakers are going to bring radio back in the home for the first time in 20 years. So what do people do when they're listening to a podcast? They do just about anything. They're exercising, they're in the car, they're recreating, they're doing the gardening, they're commuting, they're biking. You get the earbuds in and you're listening to a podcast. Folding the laundry is a great, when I do stuff around the house, I do a lot of stuff around the house. I usually have a podcast playing in the background just to keep me company, something to listen to. I have so many favorites that I listen to right now. But, the great thing about podcasting is it's on demand. So, if you want to stop and pause, start again when you're commuting home, start it up. It's not like radio where you jump out of the car to get a gallon of milk at the grocery store and you miss something when you come back in. That's a fleeting moment. Like podcasting's permanent and on demand. My clients are authors, book authors, businesses, broadcasters, nonprofits, trade associations. These people all want to get their message out in a unique way and interact with others in the industry so they can build their credibility and raise awareness, expand their influence and their reach. Their target isn't hundreds of thousands of downloads. They kind of understand what social media experts have been saying for a long time now. It's not so important to have 700,000 followers on Facebook. It's more important to have 700 of the right kind. All of my clients are happy with the results they get, and no one has stopped podcasting. They can take a break. They do take a break, which is perfectly normal. And even in some shows, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes they do what we call a Netflix drop, and they'll push out 6 shows and they'll wait 6 months and they'll drop another 6. The great thing about podcasting is there's no rules. You do what you want, you're in charge. Technically speaking, a podcast is not just an audio file embedded on some website or in a social media post or on YouTube. Those are not podcasts. Technically, it's an audio file that is pulled up to the podcast directories via an RSS feed. That's the big point right there, the RSS feed. And then it's pulled back down from those directories using a podcast app where it's consumed. These RSS feeds enable the content to be pulled up to a variety of directories where listeners can subscribe to them now for free. When the word subscribe kind of messes with people's heads, podcasts are free. And it simply allows the listener to set it and forget it. As new podcast episodes become available, they automatically appear in the library where the listener can be notified and consume the content. These major directory platforms that have already been serving up streaming audio for years. And they're the very popular ones: Apple, Google, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Deezer, iHeart, and Pandora. They're catching up now. They want podcast content on their platforms. And there's a lot of third-party apps for both Apple and Android phones. And they typically get their content from one of these major directories. So if you're using like Overcast as an app on your phone, they're pulling from one of these directories for sure. It's really important to be up there. And this, by the way, is an RSS feed. And if this is melting your brain, it should. It's a bunch of confusing code. It's meant for computers and apps, not humans. Up until 1999 and before RSS, you had to deal with mega media distribution gatekeepers like Yahoo and Microsoft or traditional radio. And they all had their hand out if you wanted a piece of the cloud. When RSS was invented, anyone with technical know-how had an unrestricted and inexpensive way to get your voice heard across the world. It's amazing. RSS was truly a game changer in digital media. Suddenly, you're everywhere. RSS stands for really simple syndication. Think of RSS as the transmitter. By virtue of RSS and those directories, your reach is enormous. Your voice and your stories can be heard worldwide, on demand, wherever there's a device and a Wi-Fi connection. With broadcast radio and television, that's for a fleeting moment, and it costs a ton of money. With RSS, it's cheap and it's permanent. How do you get an RSS feed? I thought you'd never ask. That's where media host providers come in. I have QuickBooks for bookkeeping. I have Dropbox for cloud file storage and sharing. Well, a media host is another service that you subscribe to that generates the RSS feed for you and gives you your publishing platform. This is the back end of podcasting. You upload your audio file and artwork, you write your show notes here, you create your tags and your metadata, like what you want for a copyright, who the author is, what category the podcast falls under. It gives you that look and feel for your show that you want on those directories and apps. And it also gives the listeners links to you or your guest's website. There's several to choose from. Here we're looking at Blueberry, Podbean, Buzzsprout, Libsyn. There's many more. These are some of the top ones and some of the best ones that I would recommend. And they're fairly cheap. Like Blueberry, for a month to get 4 30-minute shows up a month is $12 a month. So it's not breaking the bank in that respect. So, the real, cost is going to be your time and learning how to do this. But, the other thing that I want to make you aware of, that the space is bringing in new service providers on a daily basis almost. And a lot of them claim to be free and easy. I have to take a sip of water for this next sentence. Free and easy. Please listen to what I say next very, very carefully. If the product is free, then you are the product. If the product is free, then you are the product. Like most of us, I have a phone full of apps. And, I subscribe to these apps. I have tons of them. I can swipe 5, 6 times and I've got all these apps. Well, when I download these apps, I'm creating a profile, I'm filling out some personal information. I add a picture of myself. I allow notifications. I allow location services. I let the app know where I am. What I'm doing is we're all doing it. We're becoming a part of this huge database ecosystem that other companies selling their products will pay lots of money for. They want to know who Dan Thibeault is, what he likes, where he is, what he buys. So that's the purpose of why the app exists, really. It's not so much to find your long-lost high school friend or play a game or publish a podcast. They want your data because that's valuable. So you have to be careful with these new platforms coming in, especially the podcasting platforms that say they're free. Stay away from them. After you publish your podcast, this example is Apple on a laptop, but it's really good for showing, what comes through that RSS feed. First of all, the artwork comes through that RSS feed, the title, the author right here on my podcast, Jordan Rich. Its category is arts, performing arts. Here, it's clean lyrics. The copyright is Jordan Rich Chart Productions. There's a link right here. This won't hyperlink for me right now, but this goes back to Jordan's website here. There's these great overall description of the podcast. And then for each episode, there's show notes that talk about what podcast is about. You can provide hyperlinks to the guest that was on the show, that type of thing. They wrote a book. Hey, here's how you go buy the book. So this is why it's important to set up that RSS feed correctly and know how to do it, because it's going to express itself somewhere in these apps and these directories. This is Liz Bruner's website, and she recorded with Robin Roberts. Now, the great thing about Blueberry, I use Blueberry, by the way. I've been with them for 3 years. It's great because they offer a lot of things. One of the things is they give you the ability to put the player right on the website. So this beautiful player down here is from Blueberry. It's an iframe code that gets embedded on the back end of the website. And the great thing, about doing this is Liz publishes podcast, goes on social media, drives everybody back to her website first. Okay. First thing is Where, yeah, she's in Apple, she's in Google, she's in Stitcher, she's in all those cool places. But guess what? They don't need our help. Drive them back to your branded website first, or your personal website first. Get eyes there. Then you beat them over the head with ways to subscribe. So then here's how you do that. You put the badges on here, and then you put the URLs that go to Google and Apple and Spotify. So now you're saying, hey, thanks for coming to my site and listening to my podcast with Robin Robinson. Here's how you can subscribe and get all my other podcasts. It's the best practices right now. This is the best way to do podcasting and to drive people to listen to them. First to your site, then to the directories. Artwork. Let's talk about artwork for a moment. Here's two examples of artwork, both of my clients. Openly Rare with Paul Kidwell. I love this artwork. It's clean, it's simple. Openly Rare, it's about rare diseases. But you would know that if you read a little bit into the description, but it's just edgy enough and it's just compelling enough. The one on the right, I love the podcast content. I don't like this artwork. It's a little busy. The text is a little too small. It's just a little, this is going to end up being a little square on somebody's phone. So you just have to keep that in mind when you do your artwork. And also what's really important to know about your podcast artwork is probably the first thing people are going to see, right? Scrolling on their phone, is there are specifications, specific specifications, or it will not go up. Apple will not accept it. The other directories will not accept it. So this is a little bit of designer lingo right here, but it's got to be pixel square, 1400 by 1400 to 3000 by 3000. It has to be RGB color space. It has to be smaller than 500 kilobytes. It has to be a PNG or JPEG, and it has to be 72 DPI. That's negotiable, the DPI, but that's what I use. So in creating your artwork, if you do not have graphic design chops, you may need to get somebody to do that. However, this can be done, podcast artwork can be done on Canva. Canva is a free design program, web-based. Just go to Canva. You can subscribe for, better services, but you can create good podcast artwork on Canva. That's in the links that Jessica's going to provide, or has already provided for you. When you are recording your podcast, ideally you would be in a professional recording studio. I do a lot of work in Braintree with Chart Productions. This is owned by Jordan Rich and Ken Carberry. It's, acoustically treated. It's the best equipment. They have a library of music beds and things like that. It's just a fantastic place. However, you don't need to go into, this was just blue sky perfect world. You're in a recording studio. You can do this at home. You can do it right at home. I'm doing it at home. I do my podcast right here in my office here. One of the first pieces of equipment you might want to look at is a digital microphone. So there's an analog microphone, and that's what you're used to performing with when you're or somebody's in a club or speaking at an event. That's an analog microphone. It plugs into a mixing board and then into amplifiers, and it goes through speakers. This will plug right into your computer, your laptop, USB, and the signal is already digital going into the computer. Your computer is very happy with it, and it finds your microphone. It's in the drop-down box. So now think of it, your $2,000 laptop has a $2 microphone in it. But for under $100, you can buy this Audio-Technica 2100. That's in the link. And it's a very good quality mic. It's a lot of podcasters use them. And it goes right into your laptop. You could use a handheld recorder. These go anywhere from about $150 to $400, $500. You can get some really sophisticated ones, but they have these external microphones here and also a way to plug in analog microphones, the old style that I was talking about before. So I've used this before. You could lay this on a table with somebody else and do an interview. These microphones here will switch out, they'll change direction, or if you had a couple of analog microphones, you could plug them in here and you would get great sound. You get really decent quality. Not so much with the externals, but acceptable. There's, you know, a lot more. This, by the way, is an analog microphone. And if you already had one and you wanted to use it with your computer, you would need this guy right here for another $100 or so. You can get them for cheaper. You need what's called an interface, an audio interface. Now you're taking an analog microphone, you're plugging it into this interface, and it comes out digital. So it's a convoluted way of doing what that first microphone I showed will do automatically. But some people work this way. I am working that way right now because I have a sophisticated mixing board and I want to do it that way. This here is a setup where the microphone has what's called a pop filter. I have one here right now. It deals with the plosives. If I don't have this here and I say, Peter pick a peck of peppers, but if I have this here, it's going to take those pops away and the B's, the plosive sounds that come out with air coming out of my voice, pronouncing those words. The first one I had was I had a coat hanger and my wife's stocking will work. It'll actually work as a pop filter. But these are relatively inexpensive. You could get them for like $10. And behind that is an isolation booth. So it's supposed to absorb the sound of your voice and deaden the sound so that, you know, if you have a lot of ambient room noise, it makes it sound a little bit more like a studio. But, you know, these things can get expensive. You know, I recommend headphones for when you're recording, and especially if you have a guest. Both of you should be wearing headphones. It makes for a much better interview and a much better experience. When you're editing, which I'm going to talk about, headphones are really important when you're editing. So a decent pair of over-the-ear headphones. These are Sony's, the ones that I have on right now. They were like $79. And my wife got them for my birthday for $79. These are great headphones. This is a Blue Yeti, and that is also a digital microphone. I have that one as well. That was my first microphone that I ever bought for podcasting. And this is really popular. You will see this around, this Yeti. Just be aware, it's a condenser microphone. It's very sensitive. I was recording my first podcast and the guy like 2 yards over was mowing the lawn and I picked him up. He was in my podcast. I later learned there's ways to do noise reduction and get noises out of my editing, but I didn't know that at the time. So they're super sensitive. You really should be in a acoustically treated environment if you're going to buy that. And it's a shame because it's so popular with podcasters. They just run out to Best Buy and they buy them. They're like $129. This is another handheld like I showed you before. This here is what I'm using right now, and it's what I use to record, and it's what I bring out in the field to record remotely when I'm working with my clients. It's called the Rodecaster Pro. I'm using a Rode mic that goes with it. I have headphones. I have enough to do an interview with 4 people. I throw it all in my rolling case and I go out. It's an expensive board. Don't tell my wife, but it costs $599. And the microphones cost $100 a piece. The headphones, $79 a piece. So, you know, you're in for about $1,000 when you get all the cables and everything if you wanted to go to this level. You do not have to get a good quality podcast. If you go to my podcast and listen, the first 2 I recorded using this microphone, the Blue Yeti, and then you'll hear the quality improve, but it was decent. It was really decent. That's my Rodecaster Pro. You also need a software program to record into and edit from. Now, I told you to beware of free. In the case of Audacity here, it really is free. They're not asking you for your data. They're not asking you to sign up. You go online and you download it. It's what's called open source software. And these developers all across the world donate their time to create something. That's the concept behind Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an open source software. And people just decided they wanted to create this wonderful database of information for the world. So they all volunteer their time. They wrote the code for the program. They continually update it. Audacity is free, and I use it. It's a great program. It's everything you need to do a podcast with. There's a learning curve with it. I took some online courses. I did a lot of YouTube searches, but I did a Udemy course and learned how to use it. GarageBand is also free, and it comes with all Apple laptops, desktops, and I think now iPad. But GarageBand is an app that comes with all those Apple products. So, and it can be done. It's a little bit clunkier than Audacity, and it's meant more for music, but it can be used. Here's something to know about putting music beds into your podcast. And for that matter, YouTube videos and on your Facebook posts. You cannot use unlicensed music. You can't just use Taylor Swift's music. You will get found out. There are actually artificial intelligence programs that look at the audio fingerprint and can tell somebody's music within 2 seconds. They can see it and they'll report it back, and you'll either get blocked. I've gotten blocked on Facebook before. I've gotten blocked on YouTube before. One of them was I was just in the gym and we were doing some training, and Led Zeppelin was playing in the gym, and I put that up on YouTube and it got knocked off because it recognized Led Zeppelin. So be very, very careful. People will tell you, especially from the radio world, oh, don't worry about it. You're only using 10 seconds. Oh, don't worry about it. You're giving attribution to who the artist is. Oh, don't worry about it. That's public domain, or that's, there's a term for that. It's called fair use. And I'm going to tell you that fair use is a defense people use after being sued, okay? False, 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 false. Do not listen to anybody. Do not use other people's music. You have to use royalty-free music. And there's different ways to get that. You can get royalty-free music off of YouTube. They have a library in there. If you dig in deep, there's a library. And I do have a link in there, Jessica, for that. And then there's some other websites where people put stuff up and they create stuff and they say, buy me a cup of coffee, but it's very limited. I think Zapsplat is one of those. I've gotten a few good sound effects from there and a couple of good music beds. I pay like $300 a year for a service that gives me this big genre. I mean, every genre of music, power, movie trailer type stuff, corporate uplifting music, soft, romantic, every instrumentation. And there's tons of sound effects in there too. If I need like a zebra in Chicago with a head cold, it's there. All this stuff it's just amazing, but you got to pay for that kind of stuff. Workflow. Think about this. If you're going to do a weekly podcast, think of it this way. I would say that you're going to prep 4 to 5 hours. And also this is considering that you're going to have guests. It's not going to just be you talking. I would say preparation 4 to 5 hours. I would say you're going to want to record in one day to be efficient. Block off 5 hours. You're going to have to schedule everybody. You're going to have to either bring them into your space or do it over the phone. And then depending on the quality you want in the end result, you're going to spend about 2 to 3 hours editing a 30-minute episode. If you don't care, it's going to be real simple. You're going to edit. You're going to chop off the front. You're going to chop off the back. You're not going to care about the ums and the ahs and the person that coughed and all that stuff. You're just going to leave it all in there. Publishing is a learning curve. So using Blueberry, it took me quite a while to get really good at it. And efficient with it. But now it takes me about 30 minutes to publish an episode. And I publish tons of episodes for people. When you're going to promote it on social media or address your website, about 2 to 3 hours a week. So this is the time expectations. If you do one a month, it's obviously not so much of a time suck. So that's how that will usually play out. Again, I do use Blueberry. I am an affiliate of Blueberry. What I like about Blueberry is, unlike these free services that want your data, the other thing about those free services, they will control your RSS feed. You don't own it. If you work with Blueberry, you own your RSS feed and you control it. Therefore, you own your intellectual property. That's really, really important. You need to know that. There's other companies where you can do that. Libsyn, the other ones that I showed you, Podbean, Buzzsprout, they are reputable. But I just, I grew up with Blueberry here for the past 3 years. I really like the tech support. And as I said, I am an affiliate. If you use this promo code, you'll get your first month free. Fast Twitch. Excuse me. I have also created a podcast called 15 Minutes Of. And it's for people who want to test the waters with podcasting. They don't want to get a media host and create an RSS feed and buy a microphone. They don't want to go through all the process and start creating a weekly podcast or a monthly podcast. This way here with 15 Minutes Of, it's my podcast, but you can tell your story and be on it. So it would be 15 minutes of this company, or 15 minutes of this nonprofit, or 15 minutes of this business. And you could raise money with it. You could talk about your mission. You could just tell your story to the world. Maybe you just got an interesting story and you want to get one episode up into the cloud and you want to see what the reaction is. You know, will you get any downloads? If you promote it on social media and your website, will people come? Will there be any return on investment at all? Will, you know, your network grow in a significant way? Will you make a connection that you couldn't have made before by having a guest on your program? That's one of the great things about podcasting is if you're trying to pull people into your network or create strategic partnerships, if you ask that person or that group to be on your podcast, man, it's just a great way to create a really, really solid connection and create value for other people. So that's why I created it. You could give me a file and I would publish it, or I could help you record it, that type of thing. And if you go to my website, which is in the links there with Jessica, you'll see the different packages that I have. Before we get to the questions, I want to say to everyone, thank you very much for being on the webinar tonight and putting up with my my coughing. I usually don't go into I have to hit the cough button every 5 minutes, but I had to tonight. Thanks for putting up with that. And for being on the webinar tonight, I will offer every participant here a free 30-minute consult. So if you want, you know, after the questions are over and the dust has settled and you start thinking about it tomorrow and the next day, reach out to me and I'll give you 30 minutes to if you really want to see if this is for you or not. I mean, you really should take the time to think about all the things that have to happen before you commit to a podcast. And, you know, that'll help you decide whether you really want to move forward or not. It may not be the right thing for you. It may be the best thing for you. So that's it, Jessica. How long did I go?
Yeah, just as predicted, about it's 7:41, so it's about 35 minutes. So
I did
great.
30. Oh, yeah. I'm so good.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, so thank you very much, Dan. That was an excellent presentation, nice, concise, right to the point, and I think people probably got a lot from that, and I will find out. So we'll move into the questions now. If anyone has any questions, you can just indicate that you have a question in the chat, and I will turn it over to you. You can unmute yourself and you can direct your question to Dan. The first question, though, that we have in the chat right now is from Susan Plotnick. And Susan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Are you still here?
Sure. My question was actually around copywriting. So I think one of the slides, I think your podcast was copyrighted. And so is that something that is really critical if you're just, you know, just starting out, or kind of what are your perspectives on that?
It's a good question. There's nothing legal that happens behind that. It is simply the way it gets designated through the RSS feed and out to public facing on the apps. It just gives you the ability to throw something up there that says, this is my intellectual property. So, you know, when I did that for my podcast, or I do it for my client's podcast, that is really all that I'm doing. I'm in the back end publishing the episode and checking off a box and then writing that in there, copyright so-and-so 2020. Does that, I guess your question was, is it important? I think it's important to have that public facing. I think it's important to have that up there. It is your intellectual property. It's your RSS feed. And, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I know that when you create something and you name it and you title it, you do have rights to that. And if somebody takes that from you, just because you created it, you have, the way I understand it is you have rights in a court of law that are serious, that, you know, that can help you preserve your, I mean, you know, I guess technically you're supposed to do other steps there, but first of all, just because you created it, this goes a long way in your ownership of the property.
Okay, no one else indicated that they had a question. Any other questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask, I guess, or just indicate in the chat and I'll call you out.
Don't be shy.
This is your chance.
Sometimes people think the question isn't important, but it ends up being a great question.
Hi, I'll be brave.
Hi, Karen.
How are you? This is
Karen.
really interesting. This is something that since the pandemic, I've been listening to podcasts. I never had time to do it before, but it's a really interesting way to hear people's voices and, you know, different, you know, special interests. My interest in it is to promote a business. And it's not something that I'm looking for followership, but now I'm intrigued by that. My interest was to record something, you know, a series of podcasts and then put them on my website. What are the different ways that businesses use podcasts to build either followership or, you know, business clientele?
Well, I think, you know, having the content up there is step one, and having it accessible as a podcast is certainly step two, because you could just record stuff, Karen, and embed it on your website. And then you could just drive people to your website. No RSS feed. It's there. You could call it a podcast. People do. I've been to so many sites and they say, "Oh, check out my podcast." And it's not truly a podcast because it's not on a feed. And you could just do that. You could experiment with that. But I think the value of having it as a podcast is that your reach is much wider. It truly is the medium that people are expecting right now. You know, if they're on their phone commuting, they're probably not going to pull up your website and listen, you know, or if they're in the car, they can't. So to have it on that feed and have it on Apple and Google and all those places is pretty important. The second thing is, who are you? What's the content? What's the format of the show? Are you having guests on there? You know, if it's trying to grow your business, I don't know what your business is, but, you know, if you have a satisfied customer, do you want to have them on the show? Would they put the podcast on their website? Would they talk about, hey, I was on Karen's show, and would they promote you, and would you get a broader reach that way? Possible. It's very possible. Having somebody that you want to do business with, so you want to get a contract with somebody and they're a leader in their industry and they're brilliant. Tell them that. Call them up. Hey, you're brilliant. I want you on my podcast. I want you to share your message on my platform with my people. They're not going to say no. And then, you know, now you have a relationship that you didn't have before. A lot of doors are closed, and I don't want to. But then when you talk about podcasting, all of a sudden the door opens a little bit. Not every time, but often. Like, people are just into it. And people are overdosed right now with video. You know, it's like video fatigue, especially with this Zoom stuff. You know, it's like, so people want to hear, and it's very intimate to have those earbuds and who you're talking to. It's a very different connection. It's a very different message that gets transmitted. So what is your business, Karen, if you don't mind saying?
Yeah, so I'm employed right now, but I've been, I'm an executive coach as well. And
Awesome.
I'm really passionate, when you looked at those three circles, I'm really passionate about helping people think through transition. So many people are getting impacted right now because of job loss or just anxiety about, you know, their job. And so I've been thinking about a podcast just helping people think through possibility and what that might be like for them. And so So that's the general thought of it. It would be me at this point. But then you gave me thought, I was thinking, oh, I could interview people and, bring that content in, because I was thinking, what's a good duration for a podcast? Mark Maron is an hour, Conan is 30 minutes, depending on their formats. So,
yeah, I know. My podcasts are never beyond, well, I think I have one that's 19 minutes, but I like to keep them around 15 minutes, 13 minutes. I like to keep mine short and sweet, but Joe Rogan, we started listening to him one day. He's like had a 2-hour podcast, and it was ridiculous. I'm not really into that kind of content myself, but I'm kind of more of an NPR listener, that type of that vibe, 20,000 hertz and How I Built This and all that stuff. But I'm really curious about Randy and Jackson over there. What is your? I got to hear from you guys. What are you guys interested in?
Well, my son is interested in becoming a YouTuber.
Awesome. I love that.
He plays Fortnite, and so he's been expressing interest in getting into creating some like YouTube content or something like that. So when I saw this show, or when I saw this become available at the library, I said, "Oh, we'll sit and we'll listen to what this gentleman has to say, and see what I was thinking like you were going to talk about like how you figure out what you want to talk about and how you kind of pare it down and how you decide this is the program." And so, we've taken notes along the way.
Yeah, good, because a lot of this stuff will cross right over to YouTube. The only thing you got to add is the video, right? So. And you can put your iPhone on a holder and just point it at you for YouTube. That's a great way to start. But all the audio stuff that we talked about, the simple USB microphone, definitely for YouTube.
That's all pertinent.
Yeah. And the format stuff we talked about, all for YouTube. Same thing, only you're going to have your smiling face there.
Right.
Yeah. I have a YouTube page, and I've got a few things up there, and I've done them right here in the studio, and it's mostly just me talking about my Rodecaster Pro or how I did a live podcast and stuff like that. Check it out. But is that Jackson? Is that you wants to be a YouTube? Or is that Randy? Jackson. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. You'll love it. You will love it.
Yeah, Dad.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to chime in and share their story about why they came in today, why they're interested? Has anyone started with podcasting yet? Kind of dabbled a little bit? You can just unmute yourself if anybody wants to chime in. I didn't get any new questions, so. All right.
Nobody else? I kind of don't want it to end.
I know. We're interested here at the library.
Let me ask you this: if we did this live at the library and I brought all my equipment in, would people be interested in going through it again, or recommending it to others? And here's
we definitely want to do that. I think that would be fantastic.
Okay.
We did get another question come in here. How can you make your podcast stand out enough to attract followers?
Okay. I would say your production values really have to be superlative. So if you're going to use a crummy microphone and cough and the whole way through, and have crummy music and it fades wrong, and you will not gain a lot of listeners that way. They'll tune you out very, very quickly. Your family and friends will listen to you, maybe. I have a hard time even getting some of my family to listen to mine. It's interesting, but really production values are going to matter. And then promotion. The one thing I didn't mention is, in this world of YouTube and podcasting and digital media, discoverability is a big deal. How are you being discovered and why? So when we go back to those show descriptions that we looked at and those show notes, let me see if I can just pull up that slide really quick. search engine optimization, SEO, is important. So in this description here, you're going to want to use keyword terms. And you don't want to stuff this area with, keyword after keyword after keyword after keyword. You want it to be in a human language. There's actually AI programs that read this stuff. Google does this with their search engines. It's mind-blowing. And they index your show in the search engine algorithm based on what you've written here. And same thing in the show notes. So you have to start thinking about SEO, search engine optimization, and how to gain, a higher level of that. And a lot of that is through how you write this stuff. The other thing that's really interesting with Apple and Google is they have these AI programs that are transcribing every word that's spoken in every podcast. And they're also indexing on search engine optimization algorithms using that. So it's just, that's a big deal. So, if you want your name to pop on Google, on a Google search, or in a search on the Apple app, that stuff is important. Promotion on social media, make sure you're consistent on social media. Don't always bomb them with, hey, here's my podcast. Hey, here's my podcast. Hey, here's my podcast. Sometimes you got to give them something else and show them that, here's something else of value and it's not all about me. You got to make sure if you have opt-in email lists from your website or any other way, you got to do a newsletter is kind of important. A blog would be ideal, but I should blog, but I don't have time for a blog. I just don't have time for it. So those are the things that will help you shine. Keeping your content, I don't know. To me, I like positive stories. I like positive vibe. I'm not into the crime stuff that much, although it can draw me in. I did one thing about the Boston Strangler that was amazing. But I kind of like the positive stuff and the quirky stuff, things like that. But where was I going with that? I think to keep I know what I was going to say. It also helps to keep your content evergreen. And what that means is that a year from now, 2 years from now, that episode's still relevant. It's not all about COVID. You can mention COVID, but the whole episode is not about COVID. So, 2 years from now, and you start, maybe you're getting more listenership 2 years from. That's a great thing about these podcasts. Going to stay up there for forever and ever until even if I quit my Blueberry account with this on mic with Jordan Rich, this is going to stay there. So you may gain listenership 2 years from now, and it'd be good to have some content there that's still relevant.
Thank you so much. Well, if there's no other questions, Dan, I want to say I really, really appreciate your time tonight. I think your presentation was just so thorough. Like, people just have a lot to kind of digest at the moment. So that's really, it's really great. Definitely everybody who's on right now, check out Dan's podcast, Life Underground, and take him up on that awesome offer for a 30-minute consult. I would definitely consider that. We're thinking about doing a podcast at the library too. But we've only just started thinking about it, so we haven't gotten into the planning yet, but that's a great offer. Thank you, Dan.
If anyone wants to give me feedback on the presentation and kind of cue me in on things maybe that I should have talked about, I'd love to hear that. I'm very open to critiquing, so please do that if you feel comfortable.
Absolutely. This presentation was also recorded, and I will be sharing the recording with everyone who is registered tonight. So thank you so much. And we've got a bunch of thank yous in the chat here. I'm sure you can see those, Dan.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you.